Would you like to have comment on that, or maybe even pose a question to the panel? Can we have the mic, please? Mike.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll start from ExxonMobil and Bu Christina from BP, and also our president of IPA, so can ask a question next. But I think certainly we see, as Bu Christina mentioned in her comments, tremendous focus on eliminating corruption, making more transparency in the oil and gas sector, which is tremendous and great progress. We see a real focus on streamlining bureaucracy, which is critical to success here in Indonesia. But unfortunately, a lot of the reforms are coming at a time when oil prices and gas prices are depressed versus where they've been recently. So maybe the benefits aren't as transparent. But from a perspective of an investor, there still seems to be perhaps a gap between understanding the global competitive landscape and what it really takes to get investment going in Indonesia and what's being offered. So just from a government standpoint, I'd be interested in, from a competitive assessment, how do you assess the standing of Indonesia and how do you attract investment in this very competitive time when there are so many opportunities in the world and capital is becoming less and less available in the oil and gas sector. So it's very important to be competitive to attract investment. How are you going to do that? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Pak Widya and Pak Satya, you want to address this question. How do you perceive Indonesia's competitiveness?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very good question. In terms of upstream, it's very competitive globally now. Indonesian, as Woodmac also have studied, is not in the regime of very competitive. It's a little bit less competitive. That's why we make a lot of revision of regulation to move Indonesia to the regime of the more competitive, like the permitting system, the licensing. We make more simpler and etc. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe Pak Satya and then Pak Satya.
Yeah, right. I think I pick up your message, quite clear. So that's why I use the ease of doing business index as my reference. When I oversee the executive branch doing at the moment. Yeah, because for the multinational corporations like what your company, for instance, a lot of places that probably you have to compete with, Indonesia versus other part of the world. And you should show to your headquarters saying that, okay, Indonesia is preferable. Yeah, this is important one. And then the government of Indonesia, it has to think globally. It cannot just be a local, and then we're trying to push the investor and to invest in Indonesia. Well, we never consider the global competitiveness. So I think what's happened on the competitiveness index is quite clear here. And I do agree that there is some progress, that I have to admit. A lot of progress happened recently, at least in the administration of Joko Widodo and Yusuf Kala. Yeah, because they're trying to cut all the bureaucracy. Even permit has been shorted from 100 something now become less than that. Even though we need to have a cohesive approach between the center and the local. Here in Indonesia, I don't know whether you're familiar with Perda, with the local government regulations. It's sometimes it's contradicting one Perda and even with the law. But luckily, if you follow with the news, probably 2-3 days ago, that the Supreme Court is authorized to revoke the Perda if necessary. So the industry should, understand that bureaucracy, yeah. And SKK Migas, of course, later on has to communicate clearly with the Home Affairs Ministry as well as with the Supreme Court, in order to see whether there is any perda who can contradict with the law. Because as an investor, you follow what the law says, basically. But once you come to the implementation, you got the rejection, from the local authority. This has also become an easy thing. It may impact to the ease of doing business in Indonesia. So I think, what you like to raise here, Dan, is basically give a wake-up call for all of us here, to see that, okay, Indonesia is not standalone. Indonesia has to look at another part of the world in order for us to compete, because here I believe that you don't want that your money flows to Vietnam or goes to another part of the world. That you have to, we have you here, you have to convince them in order to attract the money come to Indonesia.
Fazil, do you want to add to that? Yeah.
Well, I think we have to admit that in some part we made an improvement of the regulation, but in the other part that we still need to improve also. For instance, if we look back into 2012, where the Constitutional Court verdict is revoked all some of the articles in the oil and gas law, and also the what they call it, the BB Migas has become exist anymore. So what happened about almost 5 years now. So I think maybe Pak Dan and Ibu Christina also, I think you should, what I have discussion with the PACs, that they see, we deal with the institution is still temporarily. It's not a fix, because it's become now, if you see the verdict of the court, it's very clear. And so, the investment in oil and gas is not in short period. It's 20, 30, even 50 years. So I have to make sure that the law of oil and gas, it has to be expedited. And the next thing, what we call it, in place, and then for their investment for a long period. Because then the certainty, it's become one of the value for them. Because the investment, they spend in first 10 years, nothing. They'll not get revenue. 15 years, that will be the first revenue they can get. While if the infrastructure of law infrastructure is not fixed, then how could they wait until 15 years? So it's another thing, maybe just input to Pak Satya, maybe if we could expedite the process, but maybe it could also will help the investment of oil and gas. Thank you.
Thank you. Kaushik, you want to add to that?
Well, I think there are two parameters. One is the absolute attractiveness of Indonesia from a competitive perspective, as you said and what Dan referred to. I think the second part that Zul talked about is equally important, which is certainty of regulatory regime, certainty and timeliness. So if decisions aren't made in time, i.e. 5 to 10 years before something expires, the new regime needs to be in place, not 2 years before, but 5 or 10 years before. If the regulations don't stay consistent, then investment does not come in. In fact, we were doing some research, and we were looking at the 2010 to 2015 period, and we were looking at PSCs that are expiring versus PSCs that are not expiring. The expiring PSCs, production was declining at 19% a year, whereas the non-expiring PSCs, production was flat to 2% decline. And what this indicates is, once companies know that they are heading towards expiry and there is no certainty, they just cut investments. They stop investing, either their talent or in terms of resources, and the country suffers. So timeliness of decision making and then consistency of regulations is very critical, and that's another area where the parliament obviously plays a big role.
Thank you. Any other
Pak
questions?
Soeb, I missed something a bit, with regard to the expiring PSCs. I do agree, and I like to give a feedback also to Pak Yonan later on and through Pak Virat here. Because the idea for giving an opportunity for the PSC to request for the extension 7 years before, or even 10 years before, it is good. I think it's a good idea. But again, the response from the government is important, because you can proceed 10 years before the PSC expired, but the problem is when the government actually respond with the request. If the government respond a year before they expired, that is no point, even though you submit already 9 years before. So there is a need of limitations, at least and the regulation. If not, probably I will consider to put it into law. How long that the government should take an action. If it not, it means that automatically extend it. I mean, that kind of thing probably create a certainty rather than uncertainty.
Thank you. Any other questions? Maybe I can pose another question in terms of the, this whole issue of certainty, yeah?
Yes.
Legal certainty, which is, I think, critical, not just for the oil and gas sector, but for many sectors within the economy. But that, again, is balanced by the fact that Indonesia is a democracy, and you have changes of government every 5 years, if not, if maybe 10 years, but the democratic process must also be brought into the equation. Right, because of a new government may have different ideas in terms of where they want to take the industry. So how do you balance that in terms of, from the legal perspective and from the industry's needs to have legal certainty? But there is a political process which must also be factored in. And maybe Kaushik, you can start off with how do other countries deal with this? From your research in terms of other markets, especially where oil and gas plays a huge role, and like you said, investments are long term. How do they deal with it?